and welcome back to another episode of the Private Practice Growth Club. And we have another featured practice owner. And actually, we should throw the confetti because this is our first male private practice owner that we have on the show. I actually just realized recently, I was just going through my channel and things. I was like, oh my word, every practice owner I've had as a featured owner has been a female, and I need to come get some representation here. So I was really excited that Dayne was willing to come on. I actually listened to his interview on the Molding Private Practice Show, which is a podcast by Kitrin. And some of you might know them. I've had the SME Metrics demo on my YouTube channel, which you can go check out. So I really loved what he was sharing, and also because we share a common interest in that we both work with ADHD. So welcome, Dayne, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and I'm honored to be your first male guest.
So let's start with you just telling everybody a bit about you, who you are, what you do, and a bit of your background.
Sure. I don't even know how to answer that. Let's see. So yes, my name's Dayne Williams. I'm an educational psychologist. I practice in Claremont. And I think foremost in my life is probably my beautiful wife, Crystal, who we've been married for about 3 years now. And then I have two amazing children. I say amazing, but they do keep us up at night. I have a 7-month-old son, Jonah, and then an almost 2-year-old daughter, Koa. So 15-month age gap, you can imagine. It's
yes, I can imagine. My youngest two are 13 months apart, so I know all about that.
Okay, I feel a kinship with you already here. I know the pain. So, but yeah, they're amazing, and obviously the big part of my life. And then from a practice perspective, I've been in education probably for education in general for the last sort of 10 years. I actually was a high school teacher for quite a significant amount of time. I taught for a year in an all-girls school, a primary school in Cape Town, and then I shifted to Westerford High School, where I taught there for 6 years. Thoroughly enjoyed it, but I think my heart wasn't necessarily in it. I always had quite a deep passion for psychology from undergraduate studies, and so I always wanted to go back. It was just a matter of when, and so I made the decision to do that. Studied part-time while I was teaching, and then fast forward many years, and here I am in private practice.
It's interesting. I mean, I was going to ask you why you chose educational psychology. But now it makes sense that you were interested in psychology, but you come from an education background. So it's kind of combining the two interests or the two loves. But then you said that you kind of had to wait for the right time to go back to studying, and that. What was that decision like? Like how? I think that there's a lot of people who, they've taken a certain path, and then they think, no, they'd like to go in a different direction. And I always tell young people, I used to work in a high school for moderate intellectual disabilities. And I used to work with the school leavers on the school exit program. And then I always tell them, like, these days, it feels like right now, like matriculants and that it's such a massive decision you're making for the rest of your life. But it's not really, because you can change your mind like down the road.
Sure.
And you can go a different direction. So that must have been, though, it's a big risk you take, because you now, you changing direction, but it's also you an adult now and adulting. So you have you need to pay bills and things like that. So what helped you decide when is the right time? And this is definitely what I want to do.
Oh, it's a great question. I don't think, well, firstly, the fact that I didn't have kids at the time was probably a massive factor, because I don't think I'd be able to do it having had kids. Although I say that I had colleagues in my class that were, 50, 60 years old, and they were studying psychology masters. So it can be done. The idea to me seems scary. But I think, I think I was probably ignorant and naive in the best possible way. I didn't overthink it. I didn't stop and think, it's going to be absolutely chaotic. I'm going to be studying now for another 6 years. How am I going to do this? I just thought, I am working. I'm currently in employment, and I'm blessed in that manner. I'm going to do this part-time. It's just going to sort of be on the back burner, and I'll tick away at it. And it reminds me of what one of my lecturers said at Stellenbosch. They would say, Dayne, how do you eat an elephant? And I'd look at them like, what? And they'd say, well, one bite at a time. And I think that's exactly it. It was just a matter of me sort of ticking away at it 1 year after the next, not biting off too much, just slowly chomping away. And, 6 years, it goes like in the blink of an eye. It goes so quickly. So before I knew it, I was already in honors. Well, I had to first go back and do undergraduate to make sure that I had all completely major in psychology. Then I had to go to honors. Then I had to go to masters. So it was a long journey, but it was just not overthinking it and just going for it. You've got nothing to lose. So
yeah, I mean, I think we're all familiar with one of the famous Mandela quotes, which is that it always seems impossible until it's done. So
exactly.
You look back and you're like, oh my word, 6 years have already passed and here I am. So yeah. So congratulations on taking that plunge and doing it and being here where you are today. That's fantastic. So I kind of alluded it to in the beginning what your focus is, but can you tell us as an educational psychologist, what is your current focus in your field?
Well, so my focus has shifted quite significantly since when I started my practice. At present, if I was to sort of put it in a nutshell, I would say my biggest focus is young adult and adolescent mental health. So surprisingly, some of your viewers may think as an educational psychologist, I primarily work with children. I actually don't work with children at all. I only work with adolescents. 13 is my sort of the lowest I will go. And so from a therapeutic capacity, it's quite varied. So, anxiety and mood-based disorders, just general life transitions and challenges. But then in addition to that, a big focus of mine has always been adult ADHD. So, I personally have ADHD, and I was diagnosed in my 20s, and it's something that has always been front and center of my life. And it's something that obviously as a result has piqued my interest. And so I was quite disillusioned by the standard of diagnoses that happen. I find that it's too easy to be diagnosed with ADHD. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of practitioners doing fantastic work. But then there are a lot that sort of just tick a box, and I felt that there needed to be more. So I've been adapting and adjusting my own sort of assessment that I use for adult ADHD. So that's also a big focus. And then I suppose the third branch of my practice is psychoeducational assessments. So, I guess in a nutshell, that's really trying to identify strengths and weaknesses that learners have in order to help support them better in a schooling system. And that I would start from maybe grade 4 and up. Many ed psychs will work with grade R, grade 1, 2, or 3. But for me, I tend to focus more on the older adolescents, but I will work with as young as grade 4. So I'd say that probably answers my focus.
Yeah, so I resonate a lot with what you're saying, because as an occupational therapist, also a lot of people assume you either work with children, or if you are working with adults, it's like strokes and things like that. And even as a student, I remember I always thought that I wanted to be a pediatric therapist because I loved children. And interestingly enough, teaching was one of the options I had as a profession. So I always thought I wanted to work with children, but then I realized that I love children, but I don't actually enjoy working with the little ones on a professional level. I like just playing with them and like having children around. And so I also chose to go the adolescent and adult route. That's actually where I prefer working. And the similar to you, where you saying like, you noticed that, it was too easy to get diagnosis. You weren't really happy with the quality of care in the adolescent and adult population. From a specifically OT point of view, also, there's a severe lack of occupational therapy services for that age group, because all OTs tend to want to work with the little ones. But the little ones grow up and they enter a new stage of life, and it does affect their occupations. So, I just felt like there needed to be more of a comprehensive service between the medical professionals and educational psychologists and OTs, and so that there's more of an option of holistic care, and particularly with adult ADHD. So really, I resonated with what you're saying a lot. So I wanted to know, I ask this question often when I have different types of psychological practices on whether it's counselors or clinical psychology. And now you are the first educational psychologist. What can you just explain what is the difference between an educational psychologist and other psychologists?
That is a complex question as well, and one that often gets debated.
Yeah.
I can give you my interpretation of it. I think at our core, most psychologists have very similar training from a therapeutic approach. But where I think it becomes a little bit more differentiated is the kinds of cases and maybe the age groups that people tend to work with. So, for example, a clinical psychologist, in my view, is someone that I would refer to when I feel there is a psychopathology that I'm not equipped to deal with, something that may be more severe, for example, schizophrenia. Whereas counseling psychologists tend to work maybe with, I don't want to downplay the severity of a psychopathology, but maybe, mood disorders as well, or anxiety-based concerns. Which is very similar to what I do then as well, as an educational psychologist. I think traditionally people have associated educational psychology with being a child or school psychologist. Those terms get thrown around, but that is inaccurate. Technically, it is a psychologist that works with individuals that are in the learning phase of their life. But even that is something really, are we ever not in a learning phase of our life? So I think,
exactly.
Yeah. So I think, many of us work with adults as well. We tend to work a lot more with families, but I guess broadly speaking, most ed psychs would work with children and probably families more than a clinical counseling psychologist. And then, of course, industrial psychologists, they kind of stand apart for themselves, and as do research psychologists. But I think those three are the ones that tend to get confused the most.
So the reason I like to ask this question is because when it comes to starting a private practice, a large part of being effective in marketing your practice is helping your potential client understand what your role is. Because let's say I think I might need help. Like, how do I know I must go to a psychologist, to an educational psychologist versus a registered counselor versus, it's confusing for the layperson who doesn't have any reference point in terms of what the different psychologies are. So how do you kind of help your prospective clients understand when they need to come to you versus when they need to go to someone else?
Well, I think for the most part, I'm very open to I always have an initial consultation with patients, and often I'll do like a sort of a free 15-minute Zoom consultation, and that's a screening time where we both get to see, are we capable of working together? So obviously I think the therapeutic relationship is perhaps the single most important factor. Obviously training is incredibly important too, but the relationship is important. And so in that time, if I feel that there are areas that need to be worked on that are not part of my competency list, or something that I don't feel that I've been trained adequately in, that's when I would refer outwards. But I think for the most part, I think contacting a clin or counseling or an ed psych is probably fine for a first call, and then after that you can obviously have that conversation as to whether you are the right fit. But often that gets led by the practitioner as well. So in my case, I would lead that. If I don't feel that I'm capable, then or competent rather, then I will refer outwards. But I guess the exception of that would be more severe psychopathologies. Like, for example, I don't work with trauma. I find that is something that is very specialized and requires very specialized care, and so I would refer out for that. Or eating disorders is not something that I feel that I could work with, so again I refer out for that. Or like I said earlier, your more severe psychopathologies, even perhaps some personality disorders as well, that I don't feel competent in, I would refer outwards. So if as a patient that you are dealing with something that is significant and you have a long history of mental illness, then it probably would be better to contact a clinical psychologist first.
I love that. And that's something that I do as well. I actually have on my booking call a free introductory call, and I make it clear, a contract that they sign, that this isn't a therapeutic relationship or consult. It's a get to know you kind of call, and to establish if we are right for each other. And I 100% agree with you. Sometimes I even have a client who I speak to who I know I have the competencies to help this person, but I just feel like I'm not the right person for whatever reason. And that's part of, the background information and stuff. And then I refer them on. Or sometimes I have somebody in the booking call. I already know that I'm not going to be able to help this person, but I take the call because I have a network that I could potentially refer them to. I had a client recently who it was kind of a mental health issue, but it was to do with the hand and like a writing and things like that. And I could take the patient if I wanted to, but I knew that that's not what I'm focused on. And she would rather be better off with a therapist that is their focus and can help them properly. So yeah, I love that. And I do recommend, that is something that I actually recommend more practices implement, is to have a way that patients can easily access that, initial consult, because people don't always know who is the right professional for them. And sometimes they need you just for that small little guidance. Absolutely.
And the average price of a psychologist now is usually around 900 or 1,000 Rand a session. That's a lot of money to spend just to know that person is not the right, fit for you. I just think that's unfair to expect people to pay that without having at least spoken to you beforehand. So, and it's an ethics thing, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's about working in the best interest of the patient. And if you aren't the right fit, even from a personality perspective, you're duty bound to try and refer them to someone who you think would be a better fit.
Absolutely. I know. I totally agree. And also, I find that when you have that initial conversation and there is a great fit, the commitment and buy-in is so much better from the outset. So when they do 100%. Book that initial consult, you're already going in with an established connection. You know what the process is. And you can also use that initial consult. If they say to you in that initial, no, I definitely want to go ahead, then you can get all that ethics stuff out of the way beforehand, where you talk about your rates and a lot of private practice owners struggle with the money conversation. And I always say that, if you talk about it in the beginning as a matter of fact thing, and you make it comfortable to talk about that right up off the bat, then it makes it easier going forward. And I always say to patients in that initial consult as well, and that if they do have a affordability issue, they can talk to me, we can work something out if we need to work out a payment plan, so that they know that they don't enter into this relationship and they get this bill and now they get such a big fright and they don't know how to tell you that they can't come back, and then they just default and then they go missing, and then it doesn't benefit them in any way. So there's also that advantage of having that conversation up front.
Absolutely. That's such a big part of my practice as well as an ed psych, because educational assessments are hellishly expensive, and that is a big bomb to drop for most parents. So that's why I actually have all my fees on my website, because it also cuts that out. People can have a look and they can see, and so they know kind of what they're getting into before they book, because it's not it's not a cheap process.
No. So I want to go take a step back, but so you then decided you're going to now go pivot from teaching to educational psychology. You did your degree and all of that stuff. When did you then decide to open up your own practice?
Immediately. I went straight into private practice. There's not a lot of educational psychology posts available. Governmental posts are few and far between, and you need usually a lot of experience in order to even get one of those posts. So that kind of ruled that out. And very few schools are able to afford educational psychologists, so they opt rather to have a clinical social worker or a registered counselor. The private schools do, but there's not a hang of a lot. There's far more jobs in Joburg actually than in Cape Town, where I'm based. And I actually just wanted to work for myself, and I wanted that flexibility, and I've got kids, so it makes sense from a family perspective to have a little bit more flexibility in the mornings. I can have this conversation with you right now, which is fantastic. I'm not standing in front of 30, adolescents now teaching geography, which I loved, but I'm not. So yes, sorry, my ADHD is clearly kicking in now, because I actually went completely off track and I can't remember even know what the question was.
Well, I was just asking when you started your practice, which you did answer.
Yeah. So immediately.
Yeah. But I think what I wanted to know then is, when you did start your practice, what were some of the biggest obstacles you faced or challenges you faced, like right at that early stages with as you know, specifically with regards to the business side of starting a practice?
So for some reason, I feel like I stumbled upon a hidden talent that I didn't know I had, and that's business. And I had no idea that I would be competent in that. And I just kind of found that path when I jumped in. So I was very lucky that I established my practice very early on. But I suppose some of the stumbling blocks, I guess initially it was trying to find a space in which to rent and getting over my own anxiety around renting something without necessarily having enough patience to pay for it. And, you know, and taking that sort of plunge. And then also it was this was just sort of before COVID that I actually originally started as well. So all of that stuff happened. And then it was kind of, you know, shifting online, but then having a place and then making decisions around websites and where am I going to invest my money, where in terms of marketing and advertising. And but I was blessed enough that I made pretty fundamentally good choices early on. And so actually the hiccups and speed bumps were fairly limited. I'm very thankful to say.
So what were some of the biggest lessons you learned then in those early days, or from those early days?
Well, I guess perhaps the biggest lesson that I think is that I'm very critical of services. Okay. So if I need a plumber at home, I will do my research online and I will judge someone based on their website. I'm not sorry to say that I will do that. I want something that I feel is professional, something that I think, yes, this person has put effort into that. They clearly care. They have a good service. So I'm very critical of other people's service. So I extend that same criticism to my own practice as well. And so for me, the biggest thing was I need people to understand exactly what I do. They need to see that I am a professional person that puts a lot of effort into my work. And so it was about spending time ensuring that my website is good. And it is visible. Ultimately, the world is changing, and there's no yellow pages anymore. From when I was growing up, there's, and word of mouth is always going to be a thing, but I don't think that you can rely entirely on word of mouth. Maybe some people can. That just was not my mindset. I didn't want to rely on that. So for me, it was about jumping on and trying to get a website that ranked on Google. And so that was a huge thing. How do I build SEO in order to ensure that my website ranks? Because you can have the most beautiful website in the world, but if you're on page 78, nobody's ever going to find you. Exactly. So that was a big thing from a business perspective, is visibility.
So I'm glad that you bring up the thing about, getting patients via word of mouth versus other forms of marketing, because I think while word of mouth is very effective, when you're just starting your practice, you need to already have a base of people to actually have mouths to give the words to from. So in the beginning, you can't rely on word of mouth. So what are some of you mentioned already having a good website, getting it ranked on Google, but that also is not something that happens overnight. It's because SEO is a long game. So what are some of the other tips that you would give to private practice just starting out in terms of marketing and getting new clients coming through the door?
Okay, so I suppose this might extend to all counselors / psychologists, but what I did was, when I first started, the first thing I did was print business cards, and I bought holders for those business cards, and then I phoned about 25 different schools across Cape Town. I first started with high schools and then primary schools. I made a huge list on my Excel spreadsheet, and I made appointments with every single counselor at every one of those schools at the beginning of the year to sit down and chat with them, introduce myself in person, because I don't refer to other people that I've never met, so I don't expect other people to either. So I made an effort to go and meet everyone, explain what it is I do, etc. And then I gave them a card holder with 25 business cards as well. I guess the fact is that if you give them a card holder, they're likely to put it on their desk, even if it's only for a month. it's there. You give them one card, it gets put in a drawer, and no one ever sees it again.
Absolutely.
So that was my mindset. If I had the budget, I would have printed a calendar or something, but I didn't. So that's what I did. And then thankfully, because I already had some networks in schools, having taught, prior to working, I had some sort of base to begin with. But that was probably the thing that sort of set the sort of ball rolling, so to speak, is just making that effort. And I did that again this year. So maybe every 2 years I'll try and make an effort, because people change, staff go and come at school. So I'll make that effort. But I primarily focus on high schools, obviously, because I don't work with younger children. So it's better for me just to focus on the different high schools. And then, of course, other than that, there's a lot of what would you call it? Like sort of databases or the platforms like Psychology Today,
and things,
online directories. That's the word. Yeah. So to take the plunge and to spend a bit of money if you have to get on there. Often it just takes one referral from that website to pay for the actual investment in the first place. So that was another factor. So actually in-person marketing myself, and then just putting a little bit of money into some marketing online. I didn't do Google ads up front. I find Google ads very expensive. It's good, they're fantastic, but I do find them quite costly, and I don't think it's a long-term solution, because if you don't do any SEO work or search engine optimization, as you would know, then it's going to fall away once you stop your Google ads. So you really want to do the hard graft to make sure that organically your website is ranking up high. So starting that early on is important.
I think the key word that you used there in what you were saying is the word investment, because I think the big mistake that a lot of practice owners make is that they think of all these things as costs. Yes, they are expenses in terms of your accounting, but you need to think of them as investments, and that is why a lot of times they would choose maybe a cost that is lower, but actually if they look at the return on investment of that cost, like a classic one is giving out like flyers, which according to the HPCSA is not even allowed. But giving out flyers is not going to give you, the amount that you spend on that 500 Rand of printing that flyers, and you maybe get nobody from that, then you actually wasted the 500 Rand compared to if you spent 1,000 Rand on whatever, like a listing or something like that, and you get 2 referrals from that. Then you would have gotten that money back plus some. So
exactly,
looking at choosing how you're going to spend your money and thinking of it as an investment rather than a cost will also help switch your mindset so that you make the decisions based on what is going to be the return on the investment rather than, oh, I have to do marketing, so I need to do something,
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And it can be done fairly affordable, for an affordable price. It doesn't have to cost you an arm and a leg. It is possible. You just need to have some time to commit to it and have conversations with people that have already done it.
But then speaking of investments in your business, and then we spoke about marketing, but there's obviously lots of other costs involved in running a practice. So what were some of the early investments you made in the business side of running your practice that, most people were like, oh, I'm not going to pay for that because it's a monthly cost? Or, what were some of the things that you put in place early on that you realize is just going to make your business more efficient and effective?
Well, the vast majority of things I had no choice. You really don't have a massive choice. Sometimes you have to do it. But I think the very first thing that comes to mind is practice management software, right? Like I would not be able to survive without practice management software. And it's funny because it's actually not that expensive, but I remember in the beginning, I thought, oh my gosh, this is a lot of money. How am I going to, can I justify this,
Yeah.
And now I'm like, geez, well, yeah, if it doubled in price, I probably would still pay it because I don't know how I would survive without it.
Yeah.
Invoicing and all that kind of stuff is hellishly boring. And to have some software that makes it a bit easier for you is a godsend. So there's probably, there's that. Understanding taxes, that was another level. I don't think I still have my head wrapped around that, to be honest, but I try. And another thing which is a recent thing for me, and it probably links into what I find is maybe one of the biggest challenges of running a practice is sick pay and leave. so challenging when you're in private practice, because, if you're working for an employer, you get paid for that. If you're not, well, it's money lost because you're not working, and you've got to find that money from somewhere, because your expenses at home don't go away because you're on leave. So
Exactly.
you've got to find that money from somewhere.
Yeah.
So, actually putting money away and saving for your own holidays and for the possibility of being sick is another expense that I don't think many people think about, but it is a necessity. I mean, you really have to.
Yeah. It's funny that you're talking about that now, because I actually just released, I have a private practice growth academy for new practice owners. And one of the modules is financial fitness. And most people, when they go into the academy, they think, okay, we're going to talk about business finances. But actually, the first 3 lessons has got nothing to do with business finances. It's all about first learning how to manage your personal money, how to pay off debts quickly, and how to set financial goals. And then only once you have that, down, because I know from personal experience, when I first went into business many years ago, not even related to our profession, my business could have done really well. But because I had such a poor handle on personal finances, I would take from the business and I would give to the business. And it was like, before long, it was like, where did all this debts come from? So it's really important as a private practice owner to actually first, get the foundations right of knowing how to, like you say, plan ahead. I know a lot of allied health professionals are women, and they, they have to go on to maternity leave, and then they have to get a locum, but that still doesn't cover all of the expenses. So how do you plan ahead for those things? You're going to be off for 4 months. Like, how are you going to cover your bills? Like you say, your bills don't go away at home. And now you have this increased expense because you have another mouth to feed as well. Babies are really expensive.
It's tough.
So I think that's some great advice, is that private practice, before you even go into private practice, like really get a handle on money and how to plan ahead, and be aware that things are going to come up and you're going to have periods where you're not earning anything.
Oh, that is key. That is key, because I speak for myself when I say you never earn as much as you think you earn. Because the money that you get every month is fantastic, but there's a lot of expenses to running a private practice. So actual profit is far less than what the bank is reflecting. So being able to prepare for that adequately, so that when there are issues that arise, you're able to absorb those fairly easily, is really important. So it's better to actually reduce the amount of money you make, but make provision or be cautious enough that, like I say, you can absorb any sort of blows, like being sick for 2 days. I mean, there are sick sort of policies, sickness policies out there that will pay out after 7 days. But, many of us aren't sick for 7 days. What happens if you have flu for 2 days? Then you could potentially lose quite a lot. So all of these little things are important to plan for, as you say.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dayne. It's been really interesting speaking to you. I think the last question that I want to ask is just that, if you could go back in time to your younger self when you were just starting out, what would you say to yourself? What advice would you give to yourself?
From a practice perspective, I would probably say take some time to really, really consider the longevity of your practice and where you see yourself in 5 to 10 years, because the decisions you make now are going to have an impact on that. So I suppose what I mean is, don't pigeonhole yourself early on by working with a specific group of people, and then you land up not wanting to work with that group of people, and it becomes difficult to pivot. So I think that would be it. From an educational psychology perspective, it's been difficult for me to also increase that level of awareness of patients, that I don't just work with children. So I've had to really consider that of how I plan my practice and how I market in a way that is open for everyone, and it doesn't feel as though it's just sort of confined to one particular area. So I think that's the one thing that I would say to myself. otherwise, yeah, I don't know if I would do anything differently at this point. I'm sure tonight when I'm lying in my bed, I'll be like, I should have said that. But right now, sure. I can't. Yeah, I think it's good.
But that's excellent advice, because actually, even in the academy, the first module is mindset and manifestation, which is a whole long module where it's like, and I always say to people when they come into the program, I know you want to get to the operational stuff, like how to do your accounting, or how to do how to do X, Y, and Z. But you have to have that vision, like you said, because like you say, your decisions you make now affects the future, but also what you want for the future will also needs to influence how you make decisions now. So I always say, like, if you want to have eventually have a multidisciplinary practice and have your own property and have people rent rooms and have maybe a franchise, then the decisions you're going to make now in the way you set up your practice is going to be very different to the person who wants to just be a solo practice, because they just want to, they're not the primary breadwinner. They just want to earn a little extra, have a little bit of flexibility. And when they're done, they're going to just close their practice. It's going to be very different how you set up your practice from the beginning. If you want to scale, you need to set it up so that it's scalable. Whereas if you don't want to scale, then you can stay small. So absolutely, don't just go into practice and just go with the flow. Have a vision for where you want to be in 5 years' time. And of course it can change. So as you go along, you change, your life changes. Of course, your vision can change, but at least have that kind of vision, from the start. So I think that's excellent advice.
Cool.
Thank you so much. As always, the links to your practice and any information about you, if anybody wants to get in touch as a potential referral partner or as a potential patient, they can see all that information in the description box below the video. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fantastic talking with you.
Bye-bye.